He stepped into the barracks that misty morning, just as the fog still lingered between the rows of housing units. His uniform was fresh, creased straight from the packaging. His black leather boots gleamed under the overhead lights. And his eyes, well, they held that look young men often carry when they believe the world is yet to test them. He was one of many recruits who arrived thinking they were ready to make a mark, thinking confidence alone could carve out respect. His gaze swept across the room instinctively, scanning the faces of those already present. And then he saw her, a woman, the only one in the room who didn't quite fit the mold, not because of her rank or her posture, but because of her face. Across her weathered skin ran a long, distinct scar from the top of her left cheek down to her jawline. It looked like something carved by steel. She didn't try to hide it. No makeup, no hesitation, no mask to make others feel more comfortable. Just a steady presence. Her eyes fixed calmly out the window. He stared a moment longer, then smirked, letting out a scoff sharp enough to draw attention. Geez, looks like someone walked off the set of a bad action movie. A few chuckles scattered around the room, but not the kind that follow real humor, more like nervous echoes of discomfort. Some lowered their eyes, others shifted on their feet. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't respond. The young recruit raised his eyebrows, shrugged, and added, "No one's going to say anything? Guess you've all gotten used to that face, huh?" And that was the moment the door behind them swung open with a sudden metallic thud. An older man stepped in, his uniform crisp, his chest lined with service ribbons, and in his hands a thick manila folder. A colonel. He didn't speak right away. His eyes moved slowly across the room, pausing only when they met the young recruits. He took a deep breath. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that settles on your shoulders and doesn't let up. "Before we begin the drills," he said, "you might want to hear this." He opened the folder, flipping to a page with practiced precision. The room fell into stillness, the kind usually reserved for church pews or funeral homes. Even the recruit straightened up, throat suddenly dry. The colonel didn't look at him again. He began reading, each word like the beat of a slow drum. Sergeant First Class Madison Clare, deployed 2014 Northern Afghanistan region. And in that single moment, the young recruit began to understand some scars are not disfigurements. They are emblems of survival, of courage, and of a kind of respect he had yet to earn. The colonel's voice echoed softly through the barracks, calm but unwavering. Sergeant First Class Madison Clare, deployed to Northern Afghanistan, 2014, Bravo Company, Forward Operating Base Echo. The young recruit, so full of bravado just moments before, stood silent now, his eyes fixed on the floor. Around him, a strange stillness settled over the room. There was no rustling of boots, no coughs, no idle whispering, only the quiet weight of words being spoken by a man who had seen the cost of war. She participated in 17 direct engagements with enemy forces. The colonel continued. Led a counter-assault team during the siege of Mazar-i-Sharif. Under heavy fire, low on ammunition, and without medical support, she led 5 soldiers through hostile terrain and successfully extracted 6 civilians from an occupied village. A breath caught somewhere in the back of the room. The colonel didn't pause for effect. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was simply stating the facts. "She sustained injuries during that mission," he said. "Shrapnel from a mortar round. The scar you see on her face, that was a result of using her own body as a shield. She covered a wounded soldier with herself. She refused medical evacuation, fought for another 9 hours until reinforcements arrived. No one dared glance at Madison. She stood at attention, eyes forward, as if the story being told wasn't hers. But it was. Every inch of it, every second of pain, of noise, of smoke and blood, that was etched into her skin. The recruit swallowed hard. The smirk he wore earlier had vanished, replaced by something far more human. Shame. The colonel continued reading. For her actions, Sergeant Clare was awarded the Bronze Star for valor in combat. She also received the Combat Action Ribbon, the Army Commendation Medal, and was nominated for Soldier of the Year by her commanding general, one of the few women to receive that level of personal recommendation. He paused. The words hung in the air like a flag waving in slow motion, quiet but unmissable. She re-enlisted twice, the colonel added, his voice softening. She never spoke of the scar, never used it as a badge. But those who served with her, they remember, not because of what she looks like, but because of what she did. The room remained still, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from fear, but from reverence. Then, without saying another word, the colonel closed the folder with both hands and held it against his chest. He walked forward, deliberate, unhurried, until he was standing a few feet from the recruit. He looked the young man square in the eyes, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with something sterner, something older. "Do you understand now," he said quietly, "what that scar means?" The recruit nodded, but it wasn't enough. Not here, not in front of the men and women who had served beside her. So he whispered, barely audible, "Yes, sir." The colonel turned. He walked toward Madison, and, in a gesture rarely seen in that setting, he saluted her first. It was simple, silent, but profound. The kind of gesture that says more than medals ever could. She returned the salute, eyes never blinking, face as still as stone. But something in the air shifted then, something almost sacred. The men in the room watched, not just the new recruit, but others too, older ones, some who had dismissed her before. They looked at her differently now, not as a woman with a scar, not as someone who kept herself in the dining hall, but as a warrior whose silence had always spoken louder than words. The colonel addressed the room one last time. "You'll see a lot of faces in your time here," he said. "Some will be new, some will be worn. Some might carry reminders of things you can't imagine. But remember this. You don't earn your place here by looking clean. You earn it by standing your ground, by protecting your team, and by living through hell without expecting applause." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With that, he left the room, taking the folder with him. The silence stayed behind. The young recruit turned slightly, casting a glance at Madison, not out of fear, not guilt, but something else entirely. Respect. For the first time since arriving, he understood something about the military that hadn't been in any training manual. That sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. That the ugliest wound can come from the bravest act. That the people we judge too quickly might be carrying the very stories we should be learning from. He wouldn't forget that moment. And neither would anyone else in that room. After the colonel finished reading, the barracks no longer felt like a place for drills. For a moment, it became something else entirely, a space where silence carried more weight than any command ever could. The colonel had left, but the echoes of his voice lingered, heavy and still. The young recruit, the one who had spoken out of turn, stood frozen in place. Then, slowly, as if moved by something deeper than orders, he took a step toward the woman he had mocked. There was no swagger in his step now, no smirk on his face, just the quiet awkwardness of a young man who had realized, painfully and publicly, that he had been wrong. He came to a stop in front of her and lowered his head slightly. His voice was no longer sharp or arrogant. I'm sorry, Sergeant Clare," he said. No one had told him to do it. There was no rule book for that kind of moment. But something in what he just witnessed made him understand that sometimes silence doesn't mean weakness. It means strength far beyond his grasp. She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. But it wasn't soft either. In her eyes was something older than judgment. Something like sorrow. As if she'd seen this kind of moment too many times before. "Don't apologize to me," she said calmly, her voice as steady as the wind before sunrise. "Apologize to yourself for speaking before you understood what someone's been through." That sentence didn't land like a reprimand. It settled like truth. Deep, simple, and impossible to forget. It wasn't just meant for the young recruit. It was for everyone in that room. A quiet reminder that in the military, the deepest wounds don't always come from enemy fire. They can come from careless words spoken by your own. From that day forward, no one ever joked about scars again, whether seen or unseen. Claire's scar became something unspoken, not out of fear, but out of respect. The young recruit changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but something shifted in him. He stopped trying to be noticed and started listening more, watching, learning. He watched how Sergeant Claire moved among her team, not with ego, but with assurance. How her orders were short, clear, and unquestioned. How she stayed calm when others panicked. How she didn't raise her voice, but still, everyone followed her lead. And bit by bit, he understood it wasn't the medals. It wasn't the scar. It was what she had been through. It was how she stood tall when others fell. It was the kind of strength that didn't need to be loud to be felt. He learned his first real lesson in the military, and maybe in life. Respect isn't given because of rank. It's given because of what someone has endured to stand where they are. This story didn't end with applause. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet transformation, a boy learning how to be a man among warriors. And if you've ever wore a uniform, if you've ever stood at attention before a flag and said nothing, you'll know some of the most important lessons aren't in any manual. They're written on the skin, in sweat, in blood, in silence. What did this story make you feel? If you believe that courage, sacrifice, and quiet strength deserve our respect, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. These aren't just stories. They're reminders of the people who've carried burdens most of us will never see. If something in this touched your heart, give it a like. And if you'd like to hear more real stories like this, of honor, of hardship, of heroes who never asked for praise, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't celebrate appearances. We honor what's been earned in silence.